Remember what happened with my mom?
That's all right.
Good evening, everyone. If you sign in the sheets at the back of the room, I'll remind you again for each application. Sign under the application to talk about it, listen to it, and that will tell us who to contact for their names or keep you up to date on what's going on. With the indulgence of council, I would like to take a few minutes to recognize an individual who passed away today. Her name was Vivian Rayner. She won't know her. But Vivian contacted me about a year and a half or 2 years ago about a vision she had of running, of organizing a theater group within the community of Air. And so after about talking to Vivian for about an hour and a half, I gave her some names of people to contact. And Vivian started out the Air Community Theater, which is a dream she always had. She passed away today, but she acknowledged that dream and she saw that dream come to fruition. And I think it's a wonderful thing, wonderful that we had her to initiate this thing in our community. And so I just want to recognize Vivian today and appreciate everything she did. So thank you. Now to start the morning. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Township of North Dunkley Public Planning Meeting for June 20th. We have 4 Committee of the Whole Committee of Adjustment applications and 1 public planning meeting application scheduled for this evening's meetings. Members of the public are able to attend the township office in person to speak on any application or register with the Planning Division in advance to attend electronically. Members of the public who have registered to attend electronically have been provided with the Zoom link to join the meeting this evening and have indicated to staff which application they would like to participate in. Staff will move these individuals who have registered into the meeting to speak in the order of application being heard, and those who are present in person will be able to speak to the application when it is reached on the agenda and will be asked to approach the podium to speak. So we will pause at times to move people in and out through the Zoom link, so your patience on that. Please note that all speakers are provided with no more than 5 minutes to address the application. The clerk will time each speaker and advise the chair when the 5-minute time limit is up. Members of the public have been provided with the following methods to watch and or participate in this open public meeting. Attend the township office located at 2958 Greenfield Road in the Dumfries Room. Watch the live stream by accessing the meeting on the township's YouTube page. Attend electronically to observe the meeting or to speak to an item on the agenda. Or finally, submit written comments to the clerk's division that have been provided to the mayor and clerk prior to the meeting and will form part of the public record. Now, to start meeting, can I have approval of the agenda, please? Councilor Russell?
Move on myself, second by Councilor Wells, that council adopt the June 20th, 2023 public planning meeting agenda presented with the following addendums. 1. And 1 piece of correspondence received for item 7.5 report under PD 23-2023 consent application for part lot 35 in section 7 North Dumfries, part lot 14, plan 662 air, parts 2 and 3 and 5, plan 67 R 485. Save and accept part 1, plan 5-8 R21400, file number B-03/23. 2, add 3 pieces of correspondence received for item 8.1, report number PD 24-2023. Application for a zoning bylaw amendment 1940 Whitby Road, file numbers ZC0120 and 30T-20301.
Councilor Larson, if you can erase the 2 in that, it should be add 3 pieces of correspondence. Thank you.
Oh, it sounded funny.
All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. I'd like to now do the Indigenous acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which we reside today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of Canada. And I think as we stop to reflect, we remember what's happened in the past, and I think it all touches our heart. And how we're moving forward with the Indigenous people today to make it a better place. And so let's reflect on that for a few moments, please. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof? Seeing none. Motion to approve the minutes, Councilor Williams.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Chili, that council approve the public planning meetings minutes dated May 29, 2022.
All those in favor? Very thank you. And Councilor Chili, adjournment to comments there is a committee of all.
Moved by myself, second by Council Williams, that the council meeting be adjourned at 7:05 p.m. to sit as committee of adjustment for purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act.
All those in favor? Scary, thank you. And the motion for the committee of adjustment, next Councilor Williams.
Moved by myself, by Council Chili, that approve adjustment. Approve the meeting minutes dated May 29, 2023.
All those in favor? Very thank you. And staff, will you let me know when you're ready? Report number PD 2023 minor variance application for 150 Montgomery Street, file number A-01/23. Notice has been given to those who have requested. The Secretary Treasurer will record everyone who has commented on this application, attended and or have registered with the closed division to attend the meeting this evening. Those individuals will be notified of the decision for the concluding future meetings. I'd like to introduce Christina Blasnova, planner, GIS technician, who will be presenting this application. Christina, please. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
The following presentation is for minor variance application A-01/23 located at 150 Northumberland Street. Public meeting was held on May 29, 2022, and the purpose of this meeting is to advance a recommendation for the committee's consideration on the merits of the application. It's a brief summary from the public meeting. The property is located on Northumberland Street, south of the intersection of River Street and Northumberland Street, with a lot frontage of approximately 18 meters and a lot area of approximately 3.5 hectares. The property will consist of an 82-unit townhouse development. This property is zoned Z4 urban residential with site-specific exemption 20.1.315 and is designated urban residential and ancillary in the context of the plan. The purpose of the minor variance application is to seek relief from general zoning bylaws 689/3 to permit 7 townhouse units to project further than 0.3 meters into the required side yard setback. The owner is seeking relief from section 6.5.3 to permit the projections listed in the chart above. This is a difference of approximately 0.12 meters or 5 inches for the largest projection. Shown again is the site plan of the proposed development. The areas highlighted in yellow are the units seeking relief to project further into the required side yard. There have been no comments or concerns from any members of the public and no new concerns from any agencies. The building department may require soft-opening protection at the time of building permit submission. Planning staff are of the opinion that the requested variance meets 4/10 of minor variance as outlined by the plan map. The first test being that the proposed variance conforms with the general intent of the zoning bylaw. In this case, the zoning bylaw currently contains regulations that permit a minor projection for leaves. The applicant is simply requesting a slightly greater projection. The proposed development is also permitted through the site-specific zoning exemption, and the proposed variance does not negatively impact the existing exemption or the development. The second test of the variance conforms with the general intent of the official plan. The proposed variance is not altering the existing development in terms of density, height, or visual impacts. The proposed application will not further affect adjacent land uses. Third, if the proposed variance is desirable, the development of 82 townhouse units on the site is an efficient use of the land as it provides increased housing supply within the town of Air, and the requested variance permits the development to proceed as proposed. And lastly, if the variance is minor in nature, the proposed increased projection of 0.12 meters or 5 inches the proposed increased projection is 0.12 meters. This is minor and will not be noticeable. Planning staff recommend that minor variance application A-01/23 for 150 Northumberland Street be approved.
Thank you, Christina. I have Kyle Whitman, Rodney Mays, and Pierre McDonald. Would either any of them like to speak? Seeing none, is there any member of the public who wishes to speak on this application? Members of council. Seeing none, can I have a motion, please? Councilor Austin.
Move on myself, second by Councilor Rollman, that PD report number 20-2023 be received, and that minor variance application A-0123 being a request to seek relief from general zoning bylaw 689-83 to permit 7 townhouse units project 0.14 meters into the side yard, whereas section 6.5.3 of the general zoning bylaw permits a maximum projection of 0.3 meter, affecting the following units described as between block C and T, unit 12 and 13, the block D and unit facing exterior, unit 20, between blocks K and L, unit 64-65, and between blocks M and N, unit 76 and 77.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. You'll let me know, Cynthia, when we're ready. Thank you. 7.3, report number PD 21-2023, minor variance application for 1277 Canyon Road, file number A04/23. Notices will be given in accordance with the Planning Act. The Secretary Treasurer will report everyone who has commented on this application, attended and or have registered with the Coast Division to attend the meeting this evening. These individuals will be notified of the decision on the convening of future meetings. I'd like to once again introduce Christina, Planner GIS Technician, who will be presenting this application. Christina, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The following presentation is for minor variance application A-04/23 located at 1277 Canyon Road. The purpose of this meeting is to provide an overview of the proposal, to solicit comments and identify issues or matters to be assessed by staff. The property is located on Cameron Road, south of the intersection of New Dundee Road and Cameron Road. The property has a lot frontage of approximately 36.5 meters on Cameron Road and is approximately 2,000 square meters in size. The subject property consists of a 2-story single detached dwelling and a pool house. Surrounding land uses are primarily agriculture. The subject property is Zone 1 agriculture and is designated rural area and protected countryside in the township of Champlain. The owner is proposing to construct a 2-story detached garage with recreational space on the 2nd story. This accessory building will be about 13 by 8 meters in size, with a total area of approximately 117 square meters. And it will have a height of approximately 5 meters. The 2nd story will be for recreational living space, including games room and storage room. The property was subject to a minor variance application file A-08/2022 in February 2023. The applicant at that time sought relief from general zoning bylaw 689-83 to permit the following: a detached garage structure with recreational space on the 2nd story within a required side yard. The requested setback at that time was 1.52 meters or 5 feet. They also were seeking relief for a detached garage structure with habitable space on the 2nd story And lastly, an existing pool house structure within a required side yard setback. The requested setback at that time was 1.52 meters for 5 feet. The owner was granted a variance by the Committee of Adjustment on March 13, 2023, to permit the following: a detached garage structure with a minimum side yard setback of 3 meters 10 feet, and a rear yard setback of 3 meters and 10 feet. A detached garage structure would have no space on the second story. And lastly, we're permitted to have the existing pool house structure with a side yard setback of 3 meters and a rear yard setback of 1.3. As mentioned during the previous slide, the applicant was not granted permission to reduce the side yard setback of the 2-story accessory building, and was also required to construct that 2-story accessory building a minimum of 3 meters or 10 feet from the rear lot line. Applicant has since revised their proposal to comply with the rear yard setback of 3 meters or 10 feet, and is requesting a new side yard setback. The only variance being requested by the applicant with this application is the reduced side yard setback for the proposed 2-story accessory building. And the variances are as follows. Section 6.4.1 establishes that no person shall erect an accessory building within a required side yard established by this bylaw. As per zone 1 regulations, the minimum required side yard is a minimum of 3 meters or 10 feet. And the owner is seeking relief from this provision to establish a side yard setback of 1 meter or 3 feet for the proposed accessory building. And second, section 7.2.3b establishes a minimum side yard setback of at least 3 meters or 10 feet for the accessory building, and the owner is seeking relief from this provision as well to establish the minimum side yard setback of 1 meter or 3 feet for the proposed accessory building. The photo located on the left is a view of the side property line. As you can see, there are currently trees and shrubs along this property line. And the photo to the right is also a view of the side property line where the proposed accessory building will be located. The photo located in the top right is the proposed area of the 2-story accessory building. And the photo on the bottom left is the area immediately behind the proposed accessory building, so just south of the rear property line. At this time, there have been no comments from any members of the public. As mentioned previously, the property was subject to a variance application in February 2023. During that February 28th statutory public meeting, one piece of correspondence was received from the adjacent property owners. The summary of those comments are as follows. The parent family had stated that they own their property across the street and they farm the agricultural fields surrounding the subject property. They are concerned that the proposed garage will impact their agricultural fields due to its proposed height and setbacks to their property lines. They would prefer a setback of 3 meters and be considered the requested reduced side yard setback for the side yard. There are no concerns from the fire department, GRTA, or Region of Waterloo, or the engineering and public works department. Staff recommends that all comments and correspondence received from members of the public and government agencies through the consultation process be returned to staff for a future report to the committee on the disposition of this matter. Staff will be considering matters including all comments and correspondence received, whether the development meets the criteria of the 4 trusts, and if the proposal is desirable for the property and compatible with surrounding land uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I have on here Stan Simmons, and he speaks if any questions, and I have Ted and Diane Perrin. Would you like to speak? Please come up to the podium and do so.
Spoke to you in February, and those concerns are still making concerns. There's no place on that property for anybody to put any material supplies to build in that building. And this is a half an acre, and this is a very large building. You're looking at almost 1,300 square feet being built. It's a second house, and as far as I'm concerned, that's what it's going to be. You've got a kitchenette in it, you've got a washroom in it, and you've got what's supposed to be a golf spot, which could be a living room, and you've got a storage area, which could be a bedroom, and you've got a game room, which could be a bedroom. And I think that this is being built to facilitate an extra family, be it in-laws or whatever, moving in at some point, or their children moving to it. It's a very small piece of property. There is hardly any parking on this property now. They park on the road, it's 80 kilometers on the road. We're constantly going down the road with machinery, and we're not the only farmers going down the road. Don goes down the road and Mark Kerman goes down the road as well. And Don's machinery is much larger than our machinery, and I almost got run off the road when he put stones on the side of the road, which I explained to you the last time. He already has a 2-car garage, which he's never used. It's full of his toys. And those toys, he has no property of his own to use those toys on. So he's a typical city person, or most typical city person. He uses his toys on farm property without permission. And, you know, if any of you are farmers, you know that just because the crops come off the field doesn't mean that we're not getting another crop on that field, be it hay or be it we're planting winter wheat. And, you know, we have crops on those fields winter and spring, fall, summer. And they're being driven on the permission.
I've only still got the beef about, I still maintain he should stay back the 9 feet. I don't know why he's got room to go to the swimming pool with this building. There's no reason why not. If there's room to build it, he can crowd it to the swimming pool as far as I'm concerned. He doesn't have to shade the farm property and hang over the line fence. That's really all I got to say.
We require this is our business, and we require the crops off of these fields to feed our animals and to house our animals. And, you know, you all know it, when it gets shaded, you lose, but we still have to maintain it with fertilizer and everything else. We can't just stop fertilizing that one section.
No, I don't know, I just was hoping you would carry through where you voted on the last time and see the light that I don't understand why we need a second house on this small property.
Thank you.
That's all I got to say.
Sam, you can go ahead and speak up, Sam. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So, yeah, we don't ever have any machines on the road or anywhere else, and we don't park in the road in any way, shape, or form either. It's actually a fairly quick road that, yeah, we don't park anything on it or anything at all. We're just I'm hoping to put a golf simulator and a spot to work out at the end of the day. It's not for my in-laws. It's not for my brothers or sisters or any other family other than our own at the end of the day. We're not looking to provide any shade or anything else. We actually have a fire pit on that corner from the owner of the lands. We have his permission at the end of the day, so we do have fires there every once in a while. We won't provide any shade because the sun actually comes up over top of it. And by the time it's over our house, that would be when the shade is going to hit the crops. I totally understand the farming and everything else at the end of the day. We're trying to comply with the 10 feet on that spot. We're actually going to be even farther than the 10 feet. We're going to be in line with the swimming pool to be symmetrical at the end of it. If we move back the 3 feet or 1 meter, we're not going to add any other shade. We're actually going to be less shaded than if we were to move it towards the pool at the end of the day, which is going to actually provide more shade onto the crops. We're trying to get it farther away from the crops, farther away from the pool, and on the side of my other neighbors who has no issues at all either. So we are trying to comply. We're just also trying to put a golf simulator in there and a workout room. And a 2-car garage, because I have a 16-year-old right now and I have a 13-year-old, and property's not getting any cheaper at the end of the day, and neither is housing. And we're just trying to, you know, at the end of it, have a spot where we can come as a family and get together and enjoy some time golfing and everything else all winter long. I happen to be in the pool industry, so I have some time in the winter to be able to do some stuff. My kids love golfing. They're going to have cars because they're going to travel and go to school. I'm sure they are. And we're just, it's already a parking spot back there. So whether we park cars inside or park cars outside and create some more space for recreation, I'm just trying to keep my kids off of the Xbox and everything else. So yeah, totally trying to comply with the 10 feet. I have no issues with that at all. As I say, we're going to be about 11.3 at the end of the day. I actually even marked it out on the driveway back there to make sure that there wasn't any complications at all. So we're not looking to park anything on the road. We're not looking to park you know, the road is the road. At the end of the day, it is a high traffic road. So we just want to park on our driveway at the end of it. And that's all we're really after.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the public who wishes to speak on this application? Any questions from council? Councilor Austin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A question and a comment all in one. The issue with the parents are talking about with parking is a completely separate issue, not affecting this application. And maybe if you see that, if that happens, you can we call bylaw or and have a bylaw officer come out and address that issue when that becomes an issue, because we can't hinge a application on what's happening with parking on the road. So if that needs to be dealt with, we need to deal with it with bylaw. The other question was, this subject property, is that at the same level as the crops? Or is it higher?
Very much. The property is higher already than the field. But as far as the side on Bustard's side, Bill wants counselor to decide, and he's kind of caught in the middle of two things. I work Bill Bustard's land also, so I'm all the way around this property. That's it, and that's why I maintain that we should have the same footage on Bill Bustard's side as the other side. There's really no reason why not.
So then the sun never stays, well, the earth rotates. But this constantly moves, so the same crops will not, like, I'm trying to grasp the concept of how much of your crop is gonna be shaded, how tall this building is versus how much of the crop is
It
gonna
will
be
move
shaded.
out like if you had a maple tree standing there, you'll be 6 rows of corn, 8 rows of corn with nothing on because it shades that far.
All day.
Most of the day because stuff doesn't grow in the shade. Doesn't matter where it is.
Now, I'm just trying to get a concept of
I know.
the property versus shade, because like my backyard, for example, I can't stand out there at 3 o'clock. But it's beautiful at 5 o'clock, you know, so I know kind of how shading works. I'm just trying to grasp the concept as to how much shade a garage will actually affect a crop.
Councilor Timmerman.
Sorry, yeah, I
one.
just wanted to chime in. We're staying back as far as what we're supposed to stay back on that crop field. So we're already beyond it at the end of the day. The only one that we're asking to get closer to would be the Bill Bustards, and there's no shadow, no shade there at all at any point in time of the year because the sun comes literally right over top of us. So there's no shadow there at all.
Thank you, Sam, but it's council's time to speak, but thank you for that, and I'm sure our staff, Christina, will look into that for
Sure.
us. Councilor Timmerman, I'm sorry.
I do have a question in regards to based on the photos that were provided in the Christine, there we go. Will this fence be remaining? Is that fence going to be removed, or is all that going to finish? Because that will be a buffer zone, I imagine.
Christina?
The fence will remain there.
Councilor Bowman.
Madam Mayor, leave this through to Christina. On page 2 of the report, there's a location map. And looking at the back of the property, you see the swimming pool with a lot of concrete around it. And then the proposed structure will also be a lot of land. What percentage of the property is now going to be covered? What percentage is going to be open landscape? I'm just wondering what our bylaw is about how much coverage we're allowed to have built structures on the property.
Through Councilor Roman, I can do those calculations and I can provide that after the meeting if you would like.
Be provided to all staff. Thank you. Any other questions, councilors? Can I have the motion, please? Councilor Williams.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Holloman, that PD report number 21-2023 be received and that all comments and correspondence received through the consultation process be returned to staff for consideration in a future report to the committee on disposition of this matter. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. 7.4, report number PD 22-2023, minor variance application for 104 Mitchell Street, file number A-05/23. Notice has been given in accordance with the Planning Act. The Secretary Treasurer will report everyone who has commented on this application, attended, and or have registered with the state permission to attend the meeting this evening. Those individuals will be notified of the decision or the convenient future meetings. I'd once again like to introduce Christina, our planner and GIS technician, who will be presenting this application. Christina, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The following presentation is for minor variance application A-05/23 located at 104 Maple Street. The purpose of this meeting is to provide an overview of the proposal, to solicit comments, and identify issues or matters to be assessed by staff. The property is located northwest of the intersection of Mitchell Street and Hunt Street. The property has a lot frontage of approximately 22 meters on Mitchell Street and is approximately 0.34 acres in size. The subject property consists of a single detached dwelling with a shed and a retaining wall that is adjacent to the east side of the principal dwelling. Surrounding land uses are primarily residential, and this property is zoned for a urban residential and is designated urban residential and ancillary in the township official plan. The applicant proposes to construct a deck in the side and rear yard of the subject property. The L-shaped deck will be approximately 6.6 meters by 4.3 meters in size, with an approximate area of 21.3 meters squared, or 230 square feet. There is also an existing retaining wall along the east property line. This retaining wall is currently used as a garden bed. It is approximately 7.6 meters in length and 1.16 meters in height. As per section 2.213 of the general zoning bylaw, a structure is defined as anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires location on or in the ground, or an attachment to something having location on the ground. It does not include a fence, pavement, curbs, walks, retaining walls under 0.91 meters in height or signs. As this retaining wall is greater than 0.91 meters in height, shall be considered a structure and requires a minor variance. As you can see in the photo to the right, the proposed deck is highlighted in purple and the existing retaining wall is highlighted in blue. The owner is requesting the following variances. Section 6.4.2 establishes that no person shall erect an accessory building or structure within 3 meters of any main building on an adjoining lot, and in no case shall any accessory building or structure be located closer than 1 meter from any interior or rear lot line. The owner seeks relief from this provision to permit an existing retaining wall structure to be located 1.61 meters from a main building on an adjoining lot and 0 meters from the interior side lot line. Section 6.5.2 states that no building or structure may be constructed or located in any side yard required to be provided under the general zoning bylaw. As per zone 4A, the minimum required setback is 1.5 meters. The owner seeks relief from this provision to permit a side yard setback of 0 meters for the existing retaining wall. And lastly, section 6.41I establishes that a deck shall not encroach into the required side yard setback established for the principal dwelling within the applicable zone classification and affixed to the residential building. The owner seeks relief from this provision to permit a deck to encroach 0.18 meters or 7 inches into the required side yard setback. The photo on the left is a view of the rear yard. The blue line shows the approximate area of the proposed deck. The photo on the right is a view of the side yard along the east side of the principal dwelling. As you can see, the retaining wall is located along the property line, and the approximate area of the proposed deck is highlighted in purple. There have been no comments or concerns from any members of the public. There are no concerns from the fire department or Region of Waterloo. The GRCA will require a review fee of $300. And the engineering and public works department provided the following comments: that some additional information would be required to determine the drainage along the property line, And provided that the downspouts are all directed away from the side yard stairs, the Engineering and Public Works Department has no objections to the proposed application. Staff recommends that all comments and correspondence received from members of the public and government agencies through the consultation process be returned to staff for a future report to the committee on the disposition of this matter. Staff will be considering matters including all comments and correspondence received, whether the development meets the criteria of the tests, and if the proposal is desirable for the property and compatible with surrounding land uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. The property owners are unable to attend. No one's registered for this item. Would anybody wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, are there any questions from council? Council Roman.
My question, simply is clarification, is this a shared retaining wall or is this just only the one of our property owners?
Christina.
Through Council Roman, the retaining wall is entirely on the property of 104 Mitchell.
Any further questions? And I have the motion, please, Council Tilly.
Moved by myself, second by Council Osner, that PD report number 22/2023 be received, and then all comments and correspondence be received through the consultation process be returned to the staff for consideration in a future report to the committee on the disposition of this matter.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. And Cynthia, you can go ahead, you don't want to come in for this. 7.4. 7.5, report on the PD 2023, consent application part 35, concession 7 North Dumfries Park lot 14, plan 662 air parts 2 and 3 and 5, plan 67R485, save and accept part 1, plan 58R21400, file number B as -03/23. Notice has been given in accordance with the Planning Act. Secretary Treasurer will report everyone who has commented on this application attended or has registered with the Clerk Division to attend the meeting this evening. You can all see this along with me, probably 3 times we should know. Those individuals will be notified of the decision of the convening future meetings. Christina Blazanovic, planner, GIS technician, will be presenting this application. Christina, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The following presentation is for consent application B-03/23 located at an unaddressed parcel south of Colonial Drive. The purpose of this meeting is to provide an overview of the proposal, to solicit comments and identify issues or matters to be addressed by staff. The property is located south of Colonial Drive along the North River. There is no frontage onto Colonial Drive. The access to the property is through a township-owned block located between 8 and 10 Colonial Drive. The property is approximately 3.46 hectares or 8.5 acres in size and consists of natural features. Surrounding land uses are primarily residential and natural features. This property is zone 12 open space and designated open space in the township official plan. Consent application B-03/23 proposes to convey the northeast portion of the subject property as a lot addition to the adjacent property located at 26 Colonial Drive. No new lot is being proposed or will be created, The proposed lot addition would convey an area of approximately 0.32 acres or 1,300 square meters in size. The proposed lot addition consists of natural features and would remain as natural features. This proposed lot addition would also remain as zone 12 open space. As you can see in the photo on the right, the subject property is highlighted in red. The proposed lot addition is highlighted with the blue hatching, and the property proposed to receive the lot addition is highlighted in yellow. The photo on the screen is a view of the rear yard of 26 Colonial Drive. The solid red line is the approximate location of the side property line between 26 and 28 Colonial Drive. The red dashed line is the approximate rear yard property line for 26 Colonial Drive. The land behind the red dashed line is the area proposed as a lot addition. As you can see, the proposed lot addition area is heavily treed. Planning staff received one piece of correspondence from the adjacent property owners located at 28 Colonial Drive. This correspondence was received on June 14th. These adjacent property owners support the proposed lot addition as they recently completed a similar lot addition for their property. They have stated that there are some trees within the proposed lot addition area that require some cleanup, including a branch that had previously fallen and damaged their fence. They've also stated that the owners of 26 Colonial Drive have assured them that they will maintain this portion of the land if their application is approved. There were no objections from the Engineering and Public Works Department. The building department does not have any concerns with the proposed application. However, they are advising that the area of the proposed lot addition is zone 12, which prohibits any buildings or structures. The regional water review requires a regional consent fee of $350 prior to final approval, and planning staff are just awaiting the remaining agency comments. Staff recommend that all comments and correspondence received from members of the public and government agencies through the consultation process be returned to staff for a future report to the committee on the disposition of this matter. Staff will be considering matters including all comments and correspondence received, whether the development conforms to the official plan and maintains the intent of the zoning bylaw, if the subject proposal is desirable for the property and compatible with surrounding uses, and any potential impacts of the proposed lot addition to surrounding properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Ms. Kelly?
No, she's on Zoom.
Carol, you're up.
Oh, well, I don't really have anything to say. I'm just here to see what everybody thinks of the idea.
Okay, thanks, Carol.
No
All
problem.
right, and is Willie here? Willie first?
Yes.
Okay, Willie? Okay, Willie, you're on mute.
Hi,
Hope you're on mute again, Willie.
just an interested party.
Okay, thank you. Willie. Is anybody in the public wish to have any comments on this application? Councilors, any questions or comments? Councilors, Tilly?
Just in regards to correspondence, I didn't see anything from the GRCA. I'm just wondering if that was normally something that we included in this.
Through Councilor Choi, the Jersey haven't provided formal comments yet, so I'm still awaiting comments from them.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, can I have a motion, please, Councilor? Councilor Rowland?
Moved by myself by Council Williams that P report number 23-2023 be received, and that all comments and correspondence received through the consultation process be returned to staff for the future report committee on the subject of this matter.
All those in favor? Carried, thank you. And I now have the motion to adjourn committee of adjustment and go back to council.
Myself, second by Councilor Kelly, that pursuant to the Planning Act, public meeting of the committee is going to be adjourned at 7:42 p.m. and council meeting be called back to order.
All those in favor? Carrie, thank you. We're now going to the public meeting, 8.1, report number PD 24/2023, application for a zoning bylaw amendment for 1940 Whitney Road, file number ZC-03/20 and 30T-20301. Notice has been given in accordance with the Planning Act. The clerk will record everyone who has commented on this application, attended, and or have registered with the clerk's division to attend the meeting this evening. These individuals will be notified of the decision of convening future meetings. And now I'd like to introduce Andrew McNally, Chief Administrative Officer, who will be presenting this application. Andrew, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight, we're convening a public meeting to deal with development applications at 1940 Wrigley Road. There are two interrelated Planning Act applications. First is a zoning bylaw amendment application filed ZC 0120, and the other is a proposed plan of subdivision with a file number of 30T-2031. Purpose of the public meeting this evening is to provide an overview of the updated revised development proposal. This property was the subject of a public meeting in August of 2020 to deal with a draft plan of subdivision and then planning zoning bylaw amendment. Since that period of time, the property has undergone an ownership change. A new owner has submitted revised both planning kind of subdivision as well as zoning bylaw amendment applications. So this is an opportunity to introduce the revised proposal and seek comments from public government agencies and other interested parties, so that comments can be reflected in the future report to Township Council on the merits of the two interrelated planning applications. The subject property is located within the urban area of Ayr. At the south limits of the property is the road frontage of Scott Street. The property is opposite the Ayr Fire Station and the intersection of Hilltop Drive and Scott Street. The property itself is addressed as 1940 Wrigley Road. The property is approximately 21.6 acres area. Historically, the property has been utilized as a licensed gravel pit. You can see from an earlier aerial photo remnants of the excavated area associated with that former extraction operation. The extraction operation itself has ceased. However, with the majority of the site now rehabilitated, filled, and graded in preparation for urban development, there still is an active and open Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry license for the property. And before any urban development can occur, the ministry must release that aggregate license. To the north of the subject lands, we have Cedar Creek and the associated environmental features associated with Cedar Creek and the associated wetland complexes. To the immediate south of the land, fronting onto Scott Street, we have linear residential development framing both the north and south sides of Scott Street through to Main Street. We have Hilltop Drive to the immediate south, intersecting Scott Street with urban residential development, the Ayr Fire Station, and Schmidt Park. To the east of the property, both on the north and south sides of what becomes Wrigley Road, because of the Ayr urban boundary, Scott Street changes into Wrigley Road. We have cultivated agricultural properties. This is just a panoramic view of the property taken at the edge of the berm along Scott Street. And so I'm looking to the north across the property itself. There are some environmental features systems in proximity to the subject lands. There are three key areas that I want to draw to the attention of council. First is Cedar Creek itself, which flows into Jedburgh Dam in this general location. You can see we have framing Cedar Creek. We have the Roseville Swamp, which is a provincially significant wetland complex. We have the Cedar Creek wetland and core woodlands as identified both graphically here in the aerial photo, but also referenced in our planning documents, both township official plan and the regional official plan. We also have the floodplain and the associated regulated area is administered through the Grand River Conservation Authority associated with Cedar Creek watercourse. These do not intrude into the development lands, which is shown in the red outline, but are in proximity and generally within that 120 meter offset from the development lands. Framing the northern edge of the development lands, the GRCA has identified and mapped what they call a steep slope classification. And it's shown generally in that yellow tone, and it crosses the subject lands and will predominantly identified on the adjacent property under separate ownership to the north. Focusing on, planning framework, we're going to start at, provincial level with overarching directives, policy and as it relates to relevant urban, development. The provincial policy statement, as published in 2020 by the province of Ontario. There are a series of subsections that are relevant in the planning statement. And it is to support growth and development of settlement areas. As mentioned previously, we are within the urban area of Ayr. New development, we want compact form with an appropriate range of mixed housing options and densities to meet both current and future residents. Places to grow with a growth plan for the greater Holden Horseshoe area on the document from year 2019. Housing strategy talks about complete communities, multi-unit residential developments incorporating a mix of unit sizes to accommodate a diverse range of household sizes and incomes, density and diversity in the overall housing stock. The regional official plan has recently amended by the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing through the adoption of Regional Official Plan Amendment number 6. As per map 3E, this property and the broader Ayr urban area are designated as an Ayr urban area. The subject lands themselves are designated as township designated greenfield areas. And when we turn to the policies that go with this greenfield areas designation, it requires the region and area municipalities to ensure that development occurs within the urban area, creation of complete communities with development patterns, densities, and an appropriate mix of land uses that supports walking, cycling, and the use of transit. Policy 2G12, which has been introduced through the approval of ROPA 6 by the minister, indicates that new development taking place within designated greenfield areas will be planned, designated, and designed to accommodate a number of items, including meeting or exceeding minimum density targets. And listed below are across the 7 area municipalities in Waterloo, and specific to North Dumfries, it's the equivalent of 51 jobs per person per hectare in new greenfield subdivision sites. Continuing on with the regional official plan as amended through ROPA 6. Policy requires that a minimum of 30% of the residential units are to be comprised of townhomes and multi-residential dwellings. Turning our attention to the township of North Dumfries official plan, the consolidated document for the year 2018. These lands in era 2008 were amended by the region to move the property once the aggregate extraction operation ceased to an urban residential classification. So in 2008, the after use or end use, once the aggregate operation ceased, was for urban residential purposes. So in that context, the principle of residential development has been established for in excess of a decade. The focus tonight is to review and consider the proposed plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment on the property, and delving into the appropriate mix of residential densities, form and lot, the road layout, and the amenity and functional aspects that will make a complete neighborhood. Looking at trail, park, the infrastructure to support that future urbanization, the road layouts, how it intersects with, in this case, Scott Street, and the promotion of active transportation opportunities, whether it be walking, cycling, blading, or similar moves in and around the neighborhood. Looking at the township official plan, so looking at the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the subject properties with the arrow. The property is designated urban area, urban residential and ancillary. And this designation represents a policy strategy that is intended to accommodate a range and mix of housing in terms of density, affordability, and satisfying the long-term needs of the township. The property, if I look at the right-hand side of the screen, is presently zoned Z14 aggregate extraction in general zoning bylaw 689-83. The only activities permitted on the property are consistent with Z14, which is either agriculture or aggregate extraction. As I mentioned previously, the property has long been exhausted of aggregate material, rehabilitated and fenced. And it's the intent of the owner, if urban approvals are granted for the plan of subdivision process and zoning bylaw amendment, to seek a surrendering of the license from the Ministry of Natural Resources. The amendment before council tonight, as it relates to the zoning bylaw, is to rezone the subject lands from Z14, the aggregate extraction classification, to zone 4D residential, and within that, there would be site-specific zones, standards and provisions to regulate the emerging built form, as well as to zone portions of the property Z12 open space to recognize the proposed parkette block, as well as the off-road trail that frames the side of the portions of the property. The subject lands, I tried to show the proposed draft plan of subdivision. The property itself, if approved as submitted, would create between 200 to 236 dwelling units. And those are broken into two different forms of housing. Approximately 137 to 151 of those future dwellings would be single detached residences, and between 65 to 85 of those future dwelling units would be comprised of multiple residential dwelling units. There is a park block, approximately 1.43 acres in area, in the approximate center of the property. Tried to highlight it with my cursor. There is a proposed perimeter trail that would intersect a future sidewalk that would be constructed along Scott Street. And the trail would frame the eastern edge of the property. And then at the northerly point, it would move in a westerly direction along the north property line to the approximate midpoint of the north property line, and then would settle in a southerly direction and come back into the interior of the plan and connect to the internal road network and the associated street sidewalk system. There are walkway blocks at different strategic locations to provide connection points to the perimeter trail at several locations, and also from the sidewalk system into the interior portions of the park block itself. The next drawing just tries to show a little bit more of the unit mix. You can see in the extreme northeast corner of the property where my cursor is showing, there's a cluster of what appears to be townhouses, walk-up apartments, and or stacked townhouses. Probably looking at a future condominium type ownership within that block. At the extreme north west edge of the property, once again where my cursor is a cluster of proposed medium density style residential units. Once again, likely comprised of either townhouses, stacked townhouses, or walk-up apartment blocks. And once again, it would be likely that these would be under condominium type ownership with private internal roads to be maintained by the future condominium corporation. The subdivision public road system almost forms a horseshoe. There are 2 points of access on Scott Street, which represents a significant change from the original proposal considered in August 2020. The first road intersecting point is on Scott Street opposite Hilltop Drive. And as I mentioned, it sort of forms a horseshoe and makes a return back to Scott Street, and it would intersect Scott Street opposite the air fire station. We have a modified grid pattern where we have two east-west road connection points, creating shorter road portions, allows for traffic calming, opportunities to modulate speed. We have predominantly single detached dwellings framing the public road system, but adjacent to the park block, which is at the center, we have the clustered on-street townhouse units. The overall development itself will be serviced by municipal water and sanitary sewers. Stormwater management is unique to this property. It's not a traditional storm pond where we have a pipe network picking up from a gutter system and piping it to a storm pond. There will be an urban curb and gutter profile, but this will be piped into an underground infiltration system, which will be situated under the park block itself. Turning our attention to the zoning bylaw amendment, the proposed amendment does create a series of hierarchical set of standards and provisions to recognize each of the different forms of proposed residential development. The purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is to implement the lot fabric and mix of residential uses as contemplated in the draft plan of subdivision, as well as to recognize the proposed lands that would be transferred and held under public ownership. So the majority of the site will be moved to a residential zone classification. The yellow represents generally where the single detached dwellings would be. The orange would be the on-street clustered townhouse type of development, and the pink or red tones would recognize those potential future condominium, clustered townhouses, stacked townhouses, or walk-up style apartments. The green representing the park block and the perimeter off-road trail network connecting around the edge of the property and back into the internal road system. It is proposed that there will be a series of site-specific zone standards dealing with matters such as setbacks, height, parking formulas, to deal with each of the different forms of housing proposed throughout the site. And as I mentioned, specifically, the Z12 open space would recognize those future parking lot and off-road trail network, which is dedicated through the subdivision process to the township as part of public land holdings. There has been 5 pieces of correspondence that have been previously shared with the township leading into tonight's public meeting. Each of those pieces of correspondence have been previously circulated to members of council. There were 3 pieces of correspondence that were included as part of the circulated planning report that was released on Thursday. A quick summary of those general comments or concerns expressed in each of the pieces of correspondence. Concern about the proximity of the environmental features, systems, and complexes associated with Cedar Creek to the north of the property, including the protection of habitat and adjacent sensitive features. Expressed concern about the overall density of the development, both the context of the site itself, but also how all this growth, when done in combination with other areas in the village of Ayr that are presently transitioning to more urban development, and specifically how this then could lead to additional traffic congestion and impacts on adjacent neighborhoods. The provision of parking within whether it be the on-street fronting development or those potential condominium clusters. Traffic and transportation. This is focusing specifically at the intersection of Hilltop Drive and the westerly internal access into the subdivision itself. And it has to deal with sightlines looking westerly towards Stanley Street. We have a change in grade. The land starts to taper down toward Main Street as we traverse westerly. There's also a sweeping curve on Scott Street as we approach the Stanley Street intersection. And there's a change in grade. We have the old ridge line of the Drumlin Fields on privately held lands to the immediate west. And the question is, with all of these factors, the curve of road, changing grade and the drumline field, how does that obscure safe operating sight lines to the west? Cars approaching the intersection and being able to safely negotiate into and onto Scott Street. Public safety related to pedestrians and cyclists and their ability to safely cross Scott Street because of both the speed of vehicles, and that's speed coming out of Wrigley Road, the rural countryside, an 80-kilometer zone, dropping to 50 kilometers right at the Air Fire Station, and obviously proximity then to the subject lands. But it's also vehicles accelerating as they're climbing the hill, moving from Main Street toward Hilltop Drive. And then the sight lines I mentioned previously. To the south, in the broader Hilltop neighborhood, we have major amenities that would be attractive to facilitate, to draw pedestrians or cyclists from this proposed plan to subdivision, including Cedar Creek Public School, Schmidt Park, and the Early On Center, as well as just neighborhood visits with the established neighborhood further to the south. There's concerns expressed about potential impacts on adjacent properties that frame the subdivision. As it relates to the proposed off-road trail network, they included Urban Creek associated with refuse disposal, the concern about people depositing yard waste or similar products over onto the adjacent private properties, trespass, loss of privacy, and the lack of fencing details to separate both the block, the park, sort of the trail block from the private land holdings frame, the subject lands. And the issue of side slopes and the safety for existing properties, concern over erosion, slumping along those common lot lines. So to sort of focus what staff will be reviewing and considering over the next few weeks and months as we prepare a follow-up report to Township Council on both the plan of subdivision as well as the implementing zoning bylaw amendment. Obviously, the comments and correspondence received in the consultation process, including comments received tonight through this public meeting. Looking at and focusing on matters that fall within provincial interest. Whether or not the proposed development conforms with both the township and the regional official plans. The zone classifications and the hierarchy of proposed residential units. What appropriate and necessary site-specific provisions would be necessary to properly capture and accommodate future intended use that's desirable for the subject subdivision, but also right down to the individual lot level. The scale of development, is it appropriate for the property, its context within the broader neighborhood, and its relationship to adjacent infrastructure, including road system, compatibility with adjacent uses and properties. And we'll be focusing on things like density, scale, height, and massing, and the mix of residential uses, visual impacts, building setbacks, including side yards, shape and configuration of the blocks of the proposed multi-residential uses, the two medium density blocks I referenced previously, and potentially how this mix and arrangement of future buildings, parking areas, site circulation, amenity areas to support those future residents can all be accommodated within those blocks. Provision for off-street parking, both within the individual freehold fronting dwelling units that frame the public road system, but also within the multi-residential blocks. The broader issue of traffic circulation at points of ingress, egress to the development off of Scott Street. What are the impacts on Scott Street and the area road network? Traffic calming measures that have been proposed within the internal road network to modulate speed of vehicles and to promote active transportation opportunities. The whole issue of the sight lines, specifically looking at the westerly intersection opposite Hilltop Drive and its relationship to that curve of the road to the west of proximity of Stanley Street, the grade transition on the adjacent property to the west, and how can the future of Scott Street be adapted to accommodate the proposed intersection without creating negative impacts on that adjacent residential property to the west. the promotion and embracing the principles of active transportation and the ability for the safe movement of people, pedestrians, cyclists across Scott Street to interface with the adjacent Hilltop neighborhood to the south. The off-road trail corridor itself, its alignment, the design parameters that have been provided by the owner, as well as details associated with fencing and landscape treatment. And then the whole premise of the stormwater management system, its principles, how it will be accommodated to reflect both the ability to support both the major and minor storm events and the utilization of the central infiltration system to accommodate both those major and minor storms. And finally, we'll be looking at the rear yard drainage and lot drainage for those properties that form the perimeter of the site. Because this was a former aggregate site, you can appreciate native grade now is much lower than the perimeter because of the historic extraction activity. So the question will be, as water runs down that hill slope to the rear yards of those future residential lots, the changing grade profile, the ability to accommodate rear yard swales that would drain to catch basins that are then piped to the road system. But in that context, how do we establish a meaningful or useful rear yard in the flat portion, right to the rear of the future residents, to accommodate things like decks, patios, and landscaped areas, without impacting on those rear yard drainage features or functions? And then do we need to look at some unique definitions and or standards to regulate future accessory structures as it relates to those rear yard slopes, where we do witness that change in grade? And finally, we have to look at the surrendering of the aggregate license and the process through zoning and or conditions to draft plan approval to make sure the sequence that occurs. But of equal importance, it's the securing the record of site conditions, recognizing the historic implication of fill material to the site, which was incorporated as part of the rehabilitation that's occurred to date, to ensure that the fill is deemed to be a clean site, in recognition that we're looking at both residential as well as park space. And of course, that has a very high level in terms of quality of fill material. And so the record of site conditions, the instrument in which that's demonstrated to the satisfaction of the province, as well as the township of the region. And once again, we'll be looking at training conditions to draft plan approval, as well as a condition on the release of the holding symbol to ensure that that documentation is appropriately filed and cleared before development can occur. It is, Madam Mayor, the recommendation of staff that all comments and correspondence received from members of the public and government agencies through the consultation process be returned to staff, and there will be a future report to members of council on the disposition of this matter. And any individual that signs the sheet at the rear of this room or has already been on our mailing list will be notified of any subsequent meetings associated with this file.
Thank you, CEO McNeely. Next up is Paul Bethune from, who would like to speak and has a presentation. Paul, please. Yeah. Is the mic on?
Madam Mayor, council, staff, and members of the public, it's my pleasure to appear before you today on behalf of the owner. And are you going to do that for me? Okay. So members of the consulting team are out there, and for the sake of brevity, I won't mention them all, but with me today is Matt Minamaya of Walter Fate. He's been doing the civil engineering, stormwater management, and paradigm transportation, been doing GIS works. So we've got a complete suite of reports that were requested as part of the complete application. Our client, it's a number company, but it's Crescent Homes, just put a name to the number. Next slide, please. I think Mr. McNeely fairly summarized the locational context of the property, so I won't get into that. I do note that, as Mr. McNeely has, that it's subject to an ERA license. And the typical protocol is to surrender that license prior to registration. And that's normally a condition of job plan approval. Next slide, please. In terms of the planning applications, there's two. Mr. McNeely explained what they are all about. Plan of subdivision, zone change application to implement the plan. And the plan is being advanced in conformity with the ROC, as well as the township OP. Next slide, please. In terms of our client's involvement and our involvement directly, we were retained in October 2021 to do some due diligence. We had the benefit of the public record, consultation with your staff, as well as regional staff and external agencies. The transaction closed in February. We submitted revised applications in March of this year. Here we are tonight. Next slide, please. So we had the opportunity really to start with the clean slate, and as we normally do, we wanted to develop a vision. So some of the key components of that vision, land use compatibility, sustainability. Our plan report includes a sustainability statement, which is somewhat unique, I think, to applications submitted in the township. We've also got an urban design brief with emphasis on walkability, active transportation, traffic calming, and pedestrian safety measures have been reported. Next slide, please. In terms of design objectives, there's a number. It's a range of unit types in conforming with the official planning policies, achievement of the density targets of the regional plan as well as the township OP. And we started off with a park that was central to the neighborhood, and we designed from there. Next slide, please. This is the left side of the screen is the original plan of subdivision, and the colored rendering is our plan. And just to get into some of the major changes, when we started off, we saw some problems with the perimeter grades, the depth of the lots that were proposed, the configuration of the lots. But most importantly, the park that was proposed was somewhat oddly configured and not particularly usable, given its dual function as an infiltration facility as well as a park. So we changed that. There's modified the pattern of streets, two access connection, a sidewalk across the frontage of Scott Street. And importantly, one of the comments that was made during the previous public meeting was the need for safe pedestrian access to link the communities, and a pedestrian refuge island is proposed, linked together with the sidewalk system, the perimeter trail, walkways that have all been strategically located to provide excellent access to the park that's proposed. Next slide, please. We can just skip through these for the sake of brevity. I would note that I do have, and we can stop there. I do have the formal presentation. I can leave it with the clerk for the public if they want to pick up copies of that. Mr. McNeely highlighted the zoning that's proposed. The yellow is essentially single detached. The lighter orange color provides for street fronting towns. Just to highlight some of the key regulations for the multiple blocks to the west. Apartments are not proposed. The zoning restricts the uses to townhouses, single detached dwelling. I think most importantly, as a common interface with those units that front onto Scott Street, a 50-meter rear yard is proposed, and of that rear yard, 4.5 to 5 meter buffers to be incorporated, planted with supplemental fencing where existing fencing needs to be replaced. And then at the northeast corner, just to clarify, the building height is restricted to a maximum of 4 stories. The proposal is cluster townhouses, and the 4 stories are required for enhanced architectural measures. Next slide, please. In terms of agency and public comments, I'll focus on what is likely to be the key issues, land use compatibility and traffic as well as grading. Next slide, please. As Mr. McNally had pointed out, there was previous extraction. The site is subject to an ARA license, which will be surrendered. There will be a record of site condition requirement to ensure that the site is appropriately remediated to residential standards. And often that's dealt with either as condition of draft plan approval. So in other words, the plan of subdivision cannot be registered, residential occupancy cannot occur until the RSC is available. And alternatively, it's dealt with through holding provisions in the minimum zoning bylaw. We'll be discussing those matters with staff at the further development. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I'm just gonna point out that the microphone is not working, so anybody online won't be hearing this very well. I just, I can see that it's that the battery died. So I just wanted to point that out.
I'll thank you. I'll try to speak very loud. My voice is quite loud. Next slide, please. So in terms of height density and traffic, we have commissioned an updated PIS. And as part of that PIS, it's considered not only traffic impact, but matters of walkability, community connectivity, and safe crossing of Berkeley Road. So pedestrian refuge island is proposed as I noted. And the PIS confirms that the surrounding street network can support the development and that turn lanes are not required to accommodate the proposal, in part because of the two street connections to Scottsdale Berkeley Road that are proposed. Next slide, please. In terms of interface relationships to existing residential, I would note that we have had some outreach from the neighborhood to us, as well as from ourselves to adjacent neighbors. I can confirm our intent is to meet in a meaningful way with adjacent neighbors to understand their issues and to drill into all the details. A very high level in terms of the property to the north. Residential is proposed, rear yards are oriented towards the existing home. There's a very significant distance separation between the proposed development and existing development. And taking existing grades into account, we calculated a vertical plane rise to run of 1/5, which in terms of compatibility measurements, typically you would look to a 1-to-1 relationship. So we think the proposal can be designed to be compatible. Next slide, please. In terms of the homes to the west, just some notes, the lots that are proposed have a minimum depth of 35 meters, ranging up to 54 meters. Today's contemporary lot depth standard is 30 meters. We propose a minimum lot width of 11 meters. And the intention is to match grade the common property line as indicated by this profile and incorporate fencing and buffering adjacent to the existing home. Next slide, please. We've focused our attention to in terms of the townhouse block that is shown in pink. And again, what we've done is ensure that there will be a usable rear yard in association with the additional depth of that rear yard, which is 50 meters, together with a landscape buffer, which would be maintained as a condition of ultimate site plan approval. I would note that in terms of the proposed zoning, the maximum building height that is proposed is 2.5 stories. Again, as a measure of compatibility with adjacent homes. Next slide, please. In terms of density calculations, the density requirements are couched in terms of minimum requirements. There's also, as Mr. McNeely pointed out, a minimum unit mix requirement. And as part of the proposal, we have come forward with a plan that conforms with the regional plan as recently amended to ROP number 6 and the minimum density targets of the regional plan, which, as Mr. McNeely has noted, is 51 people and jobs per hectare.
I'm sorry, I can just see you slipping and hitting him in the face.
Well, that's okay. I mean, we have many different ways.
Shannon.
Okay, we'll come back to it. So I think one thing to note on density is The minimum density target is measured across the township urban area of the region as a whole. So there's some sites that can achieve the density and other sites that can, but on average, that's the target. This particular site is devoid of locally significant natural heritage features. We've improved the efficiency of the overall design. And as a result, we have been able to exceed the minimum density target. Next slide, please. In terms of walkability, community connectivity, sidewalks are proposed on both sides of all streets. We've introduced 2 east-west roads. We're proposing a sidewalk across the entire frontage of Scott Street, as well as the other common measures. Next slide, please. Streetscaping is also proposed across the frontage of Scott Street, and we've got representative example here, as well as the trail landscaping adjacent to the proposed residential lots. Next slide, please. This is the preliminary facility plan, and we designed that in consultation with Walter Beatty, so we can achieve both infiltration as well as other objectives. You can note that it's basically a square park in the center of the plan, connected to existing and proposed community by the sidewalk and trail system. Next slide, please. Subdivision servicing, we've received sign off from the region as far as the functional servicing report. Grading is designed in combination with extra depth of lots to match grades at property line. Next slide, please. I won't get into all the details, but in summary, it would be our opinion that the proposal conforms with the various planning documents of the province, the region, the township's official plan. We appreciate there's some work to be done in terms of the details that Mr. McNally pointed out. Also, some meaningful consultation with we intend to undertake with the neighbors in the area. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, all. And next we have Caitlin Hughes.
Caitlin is here to assist. So
Oh, okay, thank you.
thank you.
Members of the public that wish to speak, I have Alex from Ontario Wide Real Estate Broker. Alex?
I'm not here for the.
Okay, you're not here. to speak. Okay. I have Matt Brower.
Matt is here as a resource in case.
You don't go until I go through this. Matt, Maya.
Matt Nehemiah is with Walter Beatty, and he's here to answer any technical questions associated with engineering.
Okay, I have Nitin Jan. Is that also one of those?
Nitin is the principal behind Crescent Homes and is attending remotely.
Okay. I think the next one, Paul Preston, is also. Yes, okay. Charles Wood, Chuck. I know Chuck. Chuck, are you coming up to speak?
I don't need the mic. I can't hear you people back here because you don't turn the mic on. That's true.
My mic's on.
Yeah, I couldn't hear anybody. Anyway, I gotta get the point across.
Chuck, you have to come to the podium.
I
okay?
do not.
Actually, Chuck, you do because this is a
I
live
can't hear
stream.
you. You won't use the mic.
Chuck, this is a live stream and if you don't come to the podium, the people online do not get to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Chuck.
I've lived in here for 76 years and we don't need any more development. Just go up Grantwater Road and drive down and look to the north. It looks like Mississauga. And you're gonna put this many kids crossing that road. 100 kids, give or take. They're gonna put 400 cars on that road. And we need more development? Just go for a walk downtown there sometime. And watch the traffic. Nobody does the speeding. They're all well over it. You're gonna have an accident someday out on Northumberland Street, and where are you gonna take the traffic? What do you got to say?
Oh, we're here to listen, and please, if you come up and you speak, council's here to listen to your comments and reflect on what's being said. No decisions being made tonight, so that's what we're here to listen.
Yeah, okay, I told you.
Thank you, Chad. Michelle Smith and Don Marco. Michelle, I saw you come in there. Hi. Nick, can you use the mic, please, because that's right, people online to you. Thank you so much.
Do I sound okay?
You sound wonderful.
Perfect, okay. So, thank you, counselors, everyone in the room, hi. I am the invisible house that wasn't spoken of, that's directly beside the fire hall. I guess because I'm agricultural there, I haven't been mentioned in any of this, but where that new, proposed driveway comes out is, not driveway, sorry, street, obviously concerns me, quite a bit. So two reasons, well, many more than two, obviously, in a selfish way, of course I don't want it there. It's right across from my driveway. I can hardly get out of my driveway now to go to work in the morning because of the amount of cars, which has been spoken about, that come flying up Scott Street. A lot of them are hitting like 100 kilometers an hour by the time they hit my driveway. So, I mean, that's pretty crazy. So, sorry, I always get nervous when I speak in this. Anyways, previously, even before the gravel pit was put in, they said those sight lines were no good to have an entrance there. That is why the entrance got moved down to where the gravel pit entrance was. They leased land from John Hall at that time. It wasn't safe then. I'm not sure why suddenly it's safe to put an entrance there to anything. So that's one concern. Secondly, the fire hall's right there. How are they gonna get in and out? And they're there a lot. I'm their neighbor and they're there a lot, either for calls or practices or what have you. So now they've got to deal with all this extra traffic and two entrances. I've heard rumors of a roundabout. They're probably like rumors, I don't know. But that's very concerning to me too. Roundabout, no roundabout, doesn't matter. That's gonna be really crazy congested traffic in those two entrances there. I know the subdivision needs a second entrance, which is why I don't even know why it's feasible to even have it there with that amount of houses. The only way I can see it is they have a single entrance and they reduce it to much lower amount of houses. I realize the province wants more houses, I understand all that. I just don't think it's the place to do it. Yes, I live there, for sure. I have my personal reasons, but there's bigger reasons. And I don't think the whole town of Air and all of North Dumfries should be put at risk because the fire department can't get to them in the timely way. That's a big concern. So back here earlier, when I spoke the last time. There. I mentioned about that was a concern about the driveway or the road being there. And I mentioned that I didn't even want the emergency access and it was to never be used for a roadway. And since then, now we're having a roadway there, not even an emergency access. Now it's just gonna be a roadway or an entrance to the subdivision. That's not an improvement from what I see the last time. It's not at all. So, all the things that I was concerned about the last time still are there. There's more houses now, not less. That was a big thing we all fought for. We said less houses. There's more now. I believe they were looking for 174 in the last plan. Now you're up over 200. How is that better? If we wanted less, that was definitely one of the things that many of us residents had spoken for and wanted. Then down my list here, so I spoke about the second entrance, the speed limits are ridiculous. The road allowance, I'm concerned, are they gonna end up widening Regional Road 49? And then going forward, speaking of Regional Road 49, it is Regional Road 49, and every time there's a problem, township can no longer help. Oh, sorry, that's Regional Road 49. We've all experienced that. So anything you decide now, later on, I'm gonna hear it. And how do I get through to the region? And why should I have to? Why should I have to, when these decisions are made, for the rest of my life, try to defend every time there's something going on? I should never have to. I should never have to deal with the region when there's gravel all over the road. And there will be problems going forward. Okay, one more minute. Okay, so value of my home, and I hope you all can, relate to that. Our quality of life, we've already dealt with the gravel pit for many, many years, mentioned that before. Scott Street and so when you go down Scott's further, it's all sidewalk from Stanley down is sidewalk right on the road. Like there's no buffer. I don't know, I forget what you call that spot in between. But they have none of that. And that's gonna be even busier now. It's gonna be crazy. And kids are walking up from the other end of town too. Like there's so many things wrong with all of this. And the children's and adults won't be safe crossing Scott Street, and they'll want to because of the beautiful new park over there at Schmidt Park. I get that, it's wonderful. My minute's probably up. There's more, and I know there's more people coming to talk, but I really, really hope that council really looks good and hard at this, because the traffic is crazy now. It's gonna get crazier. Someone's gonna get hurt. And I really, honestly, I hope it's not a child. A baby.
We don't want anybody hurt. Michelle, if you want to send a copy of what you presented so that it will go on the record, that's fine.
I'll try my best.
Thank you, Judy. Iris?
Yeah. I was able to speak here. I'm speaking on behalf of the group of air development concerns. And I'm currently the chair for that group. I've been for several years now. I'm starting with the previous development that was eventually shelved and sold. For those of you who don't know, my name is Iris Welch and I live on 80 Scott Street. Now, the previous proposed development had many, many issues. And none of them were ever addressed. They were talked about and we talked about them for years. But we never came to any conclusion. I guess that was the reason why the previous developer sold the property. He couldn't take it anymore. The main issues for air development concerns at that time, and as they haven't been addressed, they're still relevant. Soil contamination. We all know there was an oil tanker sitting on the site. And we all know they were doing test drills where that oil tanker site, but we never got any results. So we don't know what remedy they were going to do to rectify that contaminated soil. And the sightlines have been mentioned. There's no sightlines for a left turn out of that development. It involves removing that berm. I don't know whether that's viable, whether that's even possible without tremendous soil erosion falling onto Scott Street. The only solution that was mentioned about this berm and its removal was to build an extremely high retaining wall. We never found out whether that was engineeringly possible or whether it was just pie in the sky. Some people mentioned it could be 20 feet high. The increased traffic is by far everybody's biggest concern. If anybody who lives in air knows that currently we have all kinds of truck traffic coming down Scott Street, air brakes screeching at Main Street, turning left or right, whichever way they want to go. They can go over the bridge, they can go through the air. And these trucks are currently for the development on Swan Street. And the reason why they're coming from the gravel pit down Scott's and along Main and up Swanage because there's no truck traffic allowed on Hilltop. So they go through the village up to the development on Hilltop. Now, the truck traffic coming down from another development in Air will be horrendous. I would say at least 3 years of development going on, traffic through Air. Now, Paradigm did a traffic study at the last development in 2020. And at that time, they projected that by 2028, 866 more dwellings would have access to Scott Street. Phase 2, the Bruce development, and phase 4, Hilltop, totaled 866 dwellings. Now, because we have no public transit, then people are going to have at least 2 cars, maybe even 3. I've seen people with 4. So at the very best situation would be 866 times 2, which is 1,700 more cars coming down Scott Street from Hilltop Road. Now, the proposed development actually has increased their dwellings by 16 to 35%. Why, for God's sake, are they increasing the amount of dwellings in that small development? So we've got more people coming onto Scott Street. Now, say they only increase it by 20%. That's 220 dwellings. And someone mentioned before, previously it was 174. So why on earth is it more dwellings? Because that 220 dwellings translates, again, 2 cars, and I'm being very conservative here. That's 440 more cars.
1 minute.
Okay.
We got 1 minute.
Okay, 440 more cars. So now over 2,000 cars on Scott Street daily. There's a T-junction at the end, rush hour traffic, Gray Street, Stanley Street, Hope Street, Main Street, Hall Street. And in this mix is a school with children walking, riding bikes, skateboards, and really tall. Now, the last thing I have, and I'm hoping to get this in a minute because I have so much more I could say. Scott Street is going to be dug up from the fire hall to Stanley. There's an average of 15 emergency calls per month. Aware that the provision is made for fire trucks to have 1 lane left open, but what happens when it's not possible, and it will happen, that they have to dig up the entire Scott Street. They cannot leave a lane open. They let the fire station know they're going to have to close Scott Street. So now those fire trucks, when they get their emergency call, have to take a detour and wasting valuable minutes. I've got a lot of people retired in it. It's not just fires I'm concerned about. And one last thing, Sue, why the zoning change application before we've even got a proper plan, not just a artist drawing? Last time, the plan was ongoing for 2 years with never a zoning change. Thank you.
And I also would like to submit your comments to the staff, to the clerk.
I can-
You can send them, you might have that. Thank you. And next we have Christina. Christina? Please come forward, Christina. Thank you.
Good evening, council and Mayor Foxton. We are the owners of 100 Scott Street, so we directly will apply the new development property. We have provided written submissions which give additional details, so I'm just going to summarize our points. We just want to ensure that hear us verbally and put a name to our. First, I do want to acknowledge there are some technical improvements, but as noted, there are several things that need to be addressed. We would like to just address 2. The first is, and with respect to the number of units, of course, that's always a concern, and this has been spoken at length. So let's focus first on the wide landscaping buffer that's being proposed, and second, the connectivity of our community. So first, with respect to the wide landscape buffer, I think it was a slide 18, and it's shown in our written submission. There is a diagram of the house, several trees, then a property line, and then a couple trees, and then the new proposed development. I know that the majority of the trees are on the existing landowner's property. I can also note, some of you have been to our place and have seen our backyard, but there's no trees, it's a lawn. And so what I would like to say is, this diagram seems to be showing trees that are not existing and is misrepresenting what's there. And so I'd ask council to consider what is the developer proposing here? Are they planning to redevelop our property? I don't think so. They haven't reached out to us. So then the question is that minimal landscaping done on their side, whether that should really be expanded to really provide this wide landscape buffer that they're actually proposing to make it an actual reality. It needs to be done on their end, and that landscaping really needs to be made more extensive to really create that privacy that they're proposing that this buffer will do. With respect to the second issue, is the expanded perimeter trail system. They're proposing a trail on the outskirts of the property. However, I'd ask first is this really a perimeter when it only goes half the way around the property? And second, how does this fit in the region's approach to the walking and cycling networks and the Waterloo Region's transportation management? I would really like to ensure that this subdivision does not become an island subdivision, whereby we have to connect by vehicular access only, but instead to really focus on a trail system that will allow interconnection where these new owners can go downtown into air and enjoy the facilities that's really being developed here and have a nice platform. So on that note, I would ask council to consider, is this proposed development, the way that they structured the trail system, really conducive in creating a healthy, active community that gives an alternative to the vehicular means of transportation and considering the safety related to non-vehicular transportation? So in summary, I also wanted to know, I think there was mention that they've reached out to abutting landowners to talk. We know that we haven't been reached out to at all, so we haven't been contacted or considered in any comments there, so just wanted to make that.
Thank you very much, both of you. And again, if you want to submit your comments to the clerk, so they go on official file.
We did.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Jennifer and Scott Shannon.
Quick, I believe. Thank you guys for your time. Thank everybody here for attending this talk. Honestly, I reflect a lot of concerns, the traffic concerns, which is that I'm standing since the very beginning. The consideration of the berm as well too, that's seen as a pot of dirt these days. It's actually quite a little bit of a wild established trees. It's got quite a nice little view from a lot of people's land and a lot of people's properties in that area. So I'm just wiping out the berm for the sake of sight lines, for the sake of subdivisions and something big trees, big trees. So but with that, fully support all my neighbors and their concerns that have already brought up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Next, we have Susan Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the proposal. I won't repeat concerns that others have already raised, but I will bring to light one that hasn't been addressed yet. It's understandable that the focus of the concerns related to traffic have been on the urban area. I'm a former resident of Hall Street. I'm now a resident of Reedsville Road, so I understand the focus on the village. However, I'm very mindful that this subdivision is proposed for the east end of Air, and with a lot of traffic through the village, the path of least resistance will be down Reedsville Road. And so I looked at the traffic impact study to see whether there was anything in there that spoke to those sorts of concerns, and there is not. And so I would ask that staff and council consider the impact on Reedsville Road. It is a road that has 4 sight lines at every intersection, narrow twisting, hilly roads. And no sidewalks or other infrastructure for pedestrians and cyclists. So I see safety concerns that others have expressed relating to the village, also potentially impacting Meadsville Road in particular. So I just would ask that those factors be considered as well.
And have you, and will you give those information to the clerk as well, so it's applied an official record?
I will do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Darcy is online. Yes, Darcy, you're up, please.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Darcy, go ahead.
Thanks for having me on. Just want to address one thing and then I'll get into the concerns that I have when it comes to, we've all talked about traffic. So people are discussing the berm. So we really need to use the proper language when we're talking about that land that's adjacent to mine. It's a natural ridge, a moraine. So it's connected. It's not like dense overburden that's been pushed. So we have to realize that when we talk to the engineers and things like that, we can't use that word berm because it's interconnected with my property. That's where my main concern is. Getting back to the subdivision. So if we look at it, and if we looked at the previous owners' submissions, things when it comes to entrances haven't really changed. We just flipped it down the road, and then we look at the second entrance, which is Hilltop, and say, well, we've got a couple of options that we might be able to get our sight lines. We're 30 meters short on that sight line, but if we remove the berm, which we know, like I just went into length, it's not a berm, it's a natural ridge, we might get it, and then we might have to rely on the region for a little bit of help too. So we're looking at a subdivision that really doesn't have any entrances. And we talked about the previous one, the previous submission said we can't use that entrance at the top of the hill right across from the fire department. The region wouldn't allow us to use it. They were focused on Hilltop, if we all remember that well. And I know that the first speaker remembers that well too. So I'm really concerned that we're trying to flip those things around, and we still really haven't got a true natural entrance. And now we're talking about two entrances. So, and we really don't have that one because in the traffic study, it says no to the left turn. Okay, so if that one's been addressed a couple times. The other thing that hasn't been addressed, I've had numerous discussions in between this submission and the previous submission, is sanitary services. So we know the infrastructure in this town is fairly old. We know the infrastructure up Scott Street is old. I think that we really need to have somebody, either an engineered, stamped engineered report saying that infrastructure has the ability to take on the density that we're going to add to it. And then where we connect into it, Iris talked about it earlier, we connect into it, you have to go, the subdivision has to come out, there has to be 70 feet down to get to that point into the street, and then they have to work their way down Scott Street to Stanley Street to connect into the sanitary. So there's going to be a lot of construction going on. We've got to be concerned about emergency services, which Iris has discussed as well too. So and that's another big focal point of people leaving the town of Erin going out Wrigley Road East. And so there's going to be a major disruption when we come to connect into the sanitary, which we still haven't, I've heard people say that, yeah, we're able to absorb that into our sanitary infrastructure, but I haven't seen a report that says we can do that. So I'd like that to be part of my submissions as well. And the other one is, and we haven't talked about it, is stormwater. We've talked about the infrastructure that we have there for stormwater, but if you look at the fill, and I'm really familiar with the fill because I dealt with it for 2 years and all the noises that came with it. So we filled it with shale. So now my concern is you look at the stormwater absorption that you're not going to get because of the shale, because you don't have that drainage of natural drainage into the gravel pit. So we're going to put a bunch of houses down there. Are we going to have flooding for that group? Is there going to be enough room in that infrastructure of that stormwater system that they have in there to absorb all of that water that will not be absorbed into the ground. It's going to be carried through with the shale, the fill that was brought in. So those are, pardon me?
Darcy, you've got 1 minute left. Thank you.
So those are the concerns that I brought forward, just these three, but I've submitted previously about a week ago with some more submissions to Mr. McNeely. So I want those to be part of the record too as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Darcy. Andrea Evans Smith from Pennsylvania.
Yes, thank you very much, Council and Mayor Foxton for accepting my comments today. I've also sent some comments which are part of the public record. So I am a resident of Gray Street. I've lived in the Township of Ayr for 12 years now, but resident of Gray Street for 3 years. So I missed the last public meeting because I had only lived in this home for a month at that point. But I was previously, I lived in the Hilltop Drive subdivision, and my daughter went to Cedar Creek School. So I'm well familiar with the issues of foot traffic and traffic in the area. And living on Gray Street, we're an L-shaped street with just 7 houses on it. And we already today have a lot of traffic shortcutting down our small side street when there's a lot of traffic at some of the other intersections, particularly at the stop sign of Scott Street and Main Streets. And I'm really concerned about what the traffic is going to look like when these additional 200 plus dwellings are added. I do want to say, as a matter of record, that I am in favor of more sustainable housing for our community. I moved here 12 years ago, and if I was just getting into the housing market, I probably couldn't afford to move to Ayr right now. So I'm very fortunate to live here now, and I want to make sure that our beautiful township is accessible to lots of people. So I am in general in favor of the mixed housing that is being proposed, but I really feel that as a layperson, I don't know how I'm supposed to navigate, if I'm supposed to be talking to the region about traffic issues, if I'm supposed to be talking to the township, but I implore the council to advocate on our behalf as residents to make sure that whatever traffic solution is put in place for this new subdivision, if it does go forward, allows our township to grow in a sustainable way. I also want to thank Darcy for bringing up the issue of water runoff, how that will be managed, how water quality will be managed. I'm concerned about this site backing onto GRCA land, onto Cedar Creek, onto the Jetbrook Dam Pond, and what might happen both during the construction and once the subdivision is built to those wetland and those protected areas. I also know that our township does not yet have any transit options. We don't have a Route 77 like the township of Wilmot does. So we are just adding more cars. And I'm concerned that the way the plans are drawn right now does not make it safe for for bringing up a lot of the points they do. The fact that this is being referred to as a perimeter trail around the subdivision, as one of my other points out, is it's not a perimeter trail. If we really want to be encouraging more foot traffic in the area, I think it should be a perimeter trail, and that we should be protecting the natural areas that are there already. One of my other neighbors said that correctly or differently identified the berm as a moraine. We want to make sure that we're protecting those older trees and those natural areas, because once we take them away, we can't do anything to put them back.
Thank you, Andrea. And Bill Hall.
Thanks, Mayor and councilors.
Can you come up to the podium, please, Bill? Well, thank you.
I share everybody's concerns, but I'm just going to have David Donnelly speak on my behalf, primarily just with as being the neighbor from the north, I'm more concerned about the boundary issues. So,
David, please.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. My name is David Donnelly. I'm a lawyer who represents Mr. Hall at 30 Scott Street. The purpose of my presentation tonight is to discuss some of the concerns that Mr. Hall has and his family with the proposed development. I am legal counsel, but also have a master's degree in urban regional planning. My wife likes me to say that because she paid for the degree, but also I do have some familiarity with some of the planning issues that are at issue. There are 4 primary concerns of Mr. Hall. The first are environmental concerns. Second are traffic, third are compatibility and density, and the fourth is design. With respect to the environmental concerns, Mr. Hall has hired a biologist with familiarity with the issues like wetlands and woodlands and so on. Based on his site visit, it was quite evident to him that the shallow groundwater features on site, originating partially from the retired gravel pit, moves towards the Cedar Creek and expresses itself as groundwater seeps in wetlands. Chloride being road salt loading on the adjacent Cedar Creek as a result of infiltrating contaminated road salt into the shallow aquifer is a serious concern. Second, this groundwater movement is important to the life cycle of resident brook trout as they rely on groundwater upwellings in the bed of the stream for spawning and egg incubation. In other words, there are significant risk concerns. Finally, during the course of this inspection, there were two observations made regarding the forested area of the wetlands, again, adjacent to subject property. Based on the extent of the mature conifer forest and presence of abundant scat, it is apparent that white-tailed deer use the area for overwintering. This makes it a potentially significant refuge. Finally, there are two small wetlands with standing water that were found. One contained incubating egg masses. Both of these small wetlands may provide habitat for Blanding's turtle, an endangered species, or threatened species, which again should be investigated further. With respect to traffic concerns you've heard from the local residents, obviously Scott Street is already congested and potentially unsafe area with speeding. Adding this number of residents to the area will exacerbate those concerns. I also have an issue with the internal road network that pushes the density to the extreme regions or parts of the density. This flows more traffic through the subdivision. What typically, or the orthodox approach to this is to have traffic calming, which fronts the traffic to the road facing on Scott Street, and to not run the traffic through the subdivision, particularly by the park. This seems to be an unsafe configuration, or at least should be studied more carefully. Finally, with respect to the density, this is again a very unorthodox approach to locating density in air. Typically, or for decades now, we have located higher densities, medium density in this case, towards the center of town on Main Street. This is on the edge of town. The regional density targets are to be spread across the region. They're not to be located on a site-specific basis. In other words, this is just too much density in the wrong place. The remedy to this situation would be to bring whatever medium density is appropriate to the site closer to Scott Road or abutting Scott Road. The density reduction could be achieved by establishing a 30-meter or more buffer along the sensitive environmental features which happen to fall on Mr. Scott's property. In other words, to the north and the west of the proposed subdivision. This would have a number of benefits, including reducing the amount of traffic that would be entering onto Scott Street, and would also deal with the salt and chloride issue that was identified by the biologist. This would also put less pressure with respect to water infiltration on the adjacent significant wetlands forest feature. And finally, this would be a better typology that would better match the existing area. If you look at a Google map, which I have done of the area, there isn't a townhouse for miles around. And yet what is being proposed is an elevated density. I would say medium density is not a big change. It is a big change. When you look at the properties that are adjacent, there's one very large estate lot. There are a couple of large lot residential subdivisions, and they're proposing to have townhouses back on to these large lot properties. That is not compatibility the way land use planners traditionally think of it. So again, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, my client is not opposed to the principle of development on the subject property. My client would like it to be developed to the highest standards and best current thinking with respect to intensification. And that includes locating this type of density close to Main Street. At the end of the day, this is a car-oriented development. People who are going to go shopping, send their kids to school, are going to be using the automobile. In other words, the best place to put this type of density is closer to the services of the schools that people rely on. In my respective submission, this is not climate change responsive. Finally, with respect to the open acknowledgement, it was very moving, Mayor Foxton. I was very impressed by that. I would note, however, the township, like other townships, uses the current Ontario regulation of the Planning Act for notice to First Nations. It only provides notice to First Nations when involves within 2 kilometers of the reserve. I believe that means the First Nations never get notice of development applications in North Dumfries, and that's something that Your Worship and Council may wish to look at. Thank you. Those are.
Thank you very much. Now I open it to the floor. Would anyone else like to speak?
I have one question, if you don't mind. My question probably has to go to the folks from the Fady group. I've never heard, actually, I've heard twice now about this idea about the swim ponds being underneath ground. That just sounds kind of funky. We have swim ponds all over town, so that means we should put parks on top of all of them. Just doesn't sound right. And I don't know the theory behind it. I know it might work, I don't know. But someone already brought up as well about being can the ground absorb. Swim ponds usually stay wet all the time. They don't get, unless it's backward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Now we open it up to council. Any questions or comments? Councilor Austin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have, from the beginning, voiced my concern of this development. It has changed an awful lot. And I still share many of the concerns that our residents have spoken about tonight. A lot of my concerns that I've written down during the comments are also in this, what staff is going back to ask. So I'm not going to waste anybody's time going over the same questions. I'm going to wait till the next step comes along. And we'll deal with how staff has found the answers appropriately so far, and then I'll start asking questions.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Ray.
Madam Mayor, one of the concerns that I have, and everyone's raised it, is with regards to this trail and connectivity. We're spending a lot of money building a new entrance to Schmidt Park, coming up by the fire hall, and yet this new development doesn't connect to that at all. So people will be living in this new subdivision, will have to cross, as we mentioned, cross the street at one or two places. They won't end up at the park entrance. So I'd like to have the development consider changing their trail system a little bit so that it actually connects to our trails, not just here, but maybe future trails. And the other thing, previous proposal, we talked a lot about backlotting, how we didn't want you're driving down Scott Street, coming into Air, looking at the backyards of all these houses. If you look at the rest of Scott Street, all the houses face the street, right? So it's a nice cohesive neighborhood. Now suddenly we're gonna have a block of houses where it's in the backyard. So I know staff had talked about that last time. We're not gonna do backlotting, and now here we are with backlotting. So I want that looked at. The issue about the density of the back, I know we talked about that last time as well. They're gonna have a 8-story apartment building in the back. We thought that was ludicrous. They just changed it to a 4-story building, so that's still a problem. And Mr. Curry is concerned about the swim pond. I had the same note. Last time I talked about doing the exact same thing, and we had said we wanted to see a park block adjacent to the swim pond. But again, they just put it over top, so I'm not sure how this got put back in. But I know the last public meeting, this was a concern that we had.
Thank you. Okay. Councilor Holmes.
I think I just had some clarification questions really around rehabilitation needs in this whole thing. Especially when we're talking about this as being rehabilitated to urban development, what that means in relation to what the original plan was to rehabilitate it to agricultural area, which I think most things are, the rehabilitation plan is.
I think this one was always residential. It was always whether it was never going to go back to agriculture.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then I think I also heard someone saying that there would be no turning lanes into from Scott Street into either one of these new entrances, and that was something I think we need to look into.
Okay, Councilor Tilly.
I heard something else refer to this comment. My question is, if this was something was like this was built, is there a perimeter fencing that would be, or is it be something that's open to everything? And that's another question.
My turn? Okay, thank you, Councilor. Several issues I agree with. The streetscape, definitely. Do not want the backyards to be, do not want that at all. And I don't want a wall. I want trees and plantings along the streetscape so that the entrance to our community is beautiful. Another thing is the fencing, which I was going to touch base with. The private property of the owners have to be protected. Because we all know that if there's an opportunity to dump your grass cuttings or anything else, or you're sweeping up your yard in somebody else's property, you'll do it. And so I want definitely fencing around the properties. On the other side of the trail if you have to, but I want it there. The final thing is, C.O. McNeely, I'm not sure I should even say this, is the property to the east now zoned agriculture? I mean aggregate.
Madam Mayor, the property to the east is right now designated agriculture. It's outside the urban settlement boundary. It is zoned Z1 for agriculture. Other than the extreme north edge, which is got an environmental protection limit to recognize the adjacent Cedar Creek system. As it relates to aggregate, this property to the east is mapped as a high aggregate resource area. So characteristics signal that there is potential commercial aggregate resources below surface. From a logical perspective, you have what we refer to as the former Tom Hall pit, the subject lands aggregate. To the east of the adjacent former John Hall property is an aggregate site. Based on both the mapping and the reality of what's recently occurred in terms of historic aggregate activity, it would make sense that there is commercial grade aggregate below the surface on the adjacent property.
So let's assume that this development goes forward. And then we have an aggregate pit next door to the trail. And this council is going to be overwhelmed, or whatever council's here today, with the noise, the dust, and everything else. We have to be very mindful of this. Actually try and get a minimum distance standards from the property line out, as we've been pushing with the minister on regards to aggregate, because otherwise this is just going to be another pit. And these people that buy these homes, should they move in there, are going to come into all this noise and dust and everything else. And I understand berms, but I think I want to see more tree line berms, and I want to see the trees maintained. So if the tree dies in a pit, I want it removed, and I want another tree put in, and I want them maintained, so we can try and make life a little bit easier for everyone. Any other questions or comments, councilors? I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank you for your comments. We've listened, we've heard, we're going to attempt to do what we can, the best we can. And I'm hoping the developer heard you. I'm sure I saw him writing away, fervently writing away. So I'm sure that we can be in communication. So the process, C.O. McNeely is this meeting first. The land has not relinquished its license, so it's still under the ERA, which is the aggregate licensing process under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests. So it hasn't been relinquished yet. So that would probably be stage one, would be relinquishing the license, correct?
Madam Mayor, actually, that's probably in the middle of the process. The technical studies that were submitted in support of the application, comments are coming in from various agencies as well as peer review consultants. From that, an issues list will be created, some of which is already in the staff report that's been circulated. It'll be expanded based on the completeness of those reviews of those various studies. We still have not got formal comments from the region's transportation department on the paradigm updated traffic study and the lived experience of the Scott Street Wrigley Road interface and the historic comments that the township provided back in 2020 as related to the transition between rural countryside and urban air. So an issue list will be created. There'll be further follow-up then with Mr. Britton and his team as it relates to those matters. There will be a follow-up report to Township Council then on the plan of subdivision, additions to development, the zoning and the zone standards to reflect some of the outcome of discussions and presentations at site. Technical analysis is underway. It would be logical based on historic experience that both the record of site condition dealing with the historic fill that went into the property, as well as the surrendering of the license by the minister, would be conditions imposed on the release of the holding signal. So no urban development could actually occur until those two milestones are met and the holding symbols released off the zone. And those Those are the checks and balances to make sure that those steps are completed. And then with that, there would be the subdivision agreement, which we get down to the fine details of the engineering submissions, the legal, financial, insurance obligations, and the sequencing of development would be outlined in that subdivision agreement, registered on title. Development will occur, and then home building would follow after that.
Thank you. And I'd also like to ensure that the region comes out here, and maybe you and I can meet with the region at Scott Street and Hilltop, and actually see the hours. We like that from here when we get to go to school and also the work night actually. And also I'd like them to maybe have a sightline. I sometimes get concerned that the region sits in an office somewhere and assumes a lot of stuff. So I like them to physically come over here. Thank you. And again, thank you, everyone. Go ahead, Matt. Can you come to the mic so we can hear you, please? Or is it Diane?
Yeah, I'm Diane.
Yes, hi, Diane.
I just remember mentioning having a sidewalk at the new subdivision. Where's that sidewalk going? How far down Scott Street? Because you can't come in front of my house because my house is already sitting on the street.
So that's, Madam Mayor, for Diane, the configuration of Scott Street from the fire hall westerly through to Main Street. The region in 2024, 2025 is going to go through a design exercise. And they're going to look at what does the future road profile, both by grade, curvature of road, and components to be built into the road. So sidewalks, perhaps sidewalk and boulevards,
but there's no
bike lanes.
There's no room for such.
And that's the fact.
Unless you want to go into my bedroom.
Okay, Diane, we're not going.
That's the factor that they got new as part of their design, environmental study assessment. So until
But I'm
that's.
just saying that if you have a sidewalk coming down Scott Street on the north side, that you're going to come down so far and then you're going to come to a stop sign.
And
I get you.
And that's the thing that they will have to wrestle with as part of their overall design objectives. So until that's done, I don't know what their plans are. That is somewhat independent of this. That is somewhat independent of the plan of subdivision. What is under the control as it relates to the subdivision and the Scott Street frontage. What is proposed is a sidewalk on the north side of the road, starting at the east limits of the development to the westerly of the two intersections, so the one opposite Hilltop Drive. And what the study shows is that it would terminate at the west side of that intersection. And then they're proposing to draw the traffic, pedestrian cycling across Scott Street to the south side where the sidewalk system is presently located.
But you have people crossing on a curb.
And that's the issue that's been raised several times. And that is one of the key issues that has to be wrestled with. That was the issue back in 2020. It is still the concern.
It's been an issue since they put in Scott Street with a curve and the hill.
So it's been a long-standing concern. And it's something that has to be wrestled with as part of the consideration of the subdivision. Some of that goes beyond the subdivision and is part of the overall design parameters. Because Scott Street itself. Correct.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, so,
Could I have
go ahead, yes, Iris, go ahead.
Thank you.
Can you come up to the mic, please, Iris? Thank you for those listening on.
One question, it probably Andrew can answer it better than yourself. Is in the original subdivision, we first went to the meeting in 2020 and all the way through until 2022. they, I guess the area was still zoned agricultural, and yet we've gone through planning, proper architectural plans, grading, roadways in, the viability, everything. Why is zoning changed now when the subdivision hasn't even, all we've got is a nice drawing from, I don't know, it's an artist drawing, it's a concept, it's a dream. You know, even to trees on somebody's property where there aren't any. So why do we have a zoning change now? Shouldn't we wait and see just what we end up with before we change the zone?
That may be too late, but can see how we can go ahead, don't be biased.
So Madam Mayor, through Ms. Welch, it's not uncommon to run in parallel plan of subdivision and the implementing zoning bylaw amendment. They do, by design, fit hand in glove. There are a series of technical reports that have been undertaken by the proponent. They've been updated from the original work that was undertaken in year 2020. They are submitted by the owner based on their revised and updated draft plan and zone schedules. They're available for viewing and downloading on our website. You can see the historic reports, which have been basically replaced, as well as the current documents. And as part of our review, Conservation Authority, the region, we will be reviewing each of those reports, and they will inform some recommendations back to council as it relates to local lot and road configuration, the unit mix, the standards that would regulate those future urban uses, the sequencing of development, whether it be on-site or off-site, because there's going to be some off-site impacts that have to be dealt with to allow these lands to be urbanized. And as I said, the two processes fit together, and there's a checks and balance between the two processes to make sure that development that does unfold over time occurs in a sequential and integrated fashion.
Okay, I understand that, Andrew. But my question is, by changing the zoning to residential now from a really what council is saying, this is going to be a subdivision here regardless.
So Ms. Welch, as I mentioned at the very outset, back in about OPA 10, so we're going back about 15 years ago, the decision was made at that point in time.
Yeah.
So the principle of residential development on this property, once the aggregate use ceased, was made. This council is now having to figure out what is the appropriate arrangement of the activities, recognizing residential uses on this property, and how is it properly arranged within the boundaries of the property? How does it interface with adjacent other properties held by longstanding owners, as well as interface with Scott Street and the established neighborhoods on the south side of Scott Street. But the principal residential development has been in place through the adoption of OPA 10 over 15 years ago. We're now focusing on how does that development come forward, what does it look like, and how will it be properly regulated, for lack of a better term, in terms of its sequencing and the urbanization of these lands.
Okay, I'm gonna let Nick speak, and that should be it for tonight, because everybody's had the chance.
Sorry, I just wanted to get a quick point. You'll have to look into it, Mr. McNeely. I feel like Regional Road 49, they already widened it once. And I think there's some sort of rule, I don't know this, please look into it, that they can't do it again, they can't take it again. I don't know that, I was just told that one, so.
We can.
They
can
can.
see how we feel. Yeah, there's no reason why they couldn't commit one.
So, to Madam Mayor, comment, yes. However, there has to be a basis of justification. It's just not, I'm taking your land. That's why I mentioned they're doing that study in 24-25, and part of that's what they call an environmental study report. And it looks at all of those components I talked about: bike lanes, urbanization, sidewalks, connectivity, traffic movements, turning movements, interfaces to private driveways in front on the curve of the road, and all those pieces will form part of their analysis. They will then identify issues, points of conflict, and means of which through the improvement, how to resolve or mitigate those potential impacts that have been identified. And that will establish a new road profile. And the question will be, do they have sufficient right of way presently to accommodate whatever that future cross section would look like for the Scott Street improvement? The interesting thing here is not only are we dealing with a hill, a curve, established properties, emerging urban development, we've got this whole issue of coming out of the rural countryside and the speed limit of 80 kilometers dropping immediately to 50. And so how do you, beyond the, they'll call it Scott Street improvements, how do you best modulate the speed entering into the village so that it's doing 50 or better as it hits the urban area? And one of the things that we've been trying to stress to the region is you can't look at Scott Street in isolation. It's got to be part of the Wrigley connection of what is that whole network look. If I look from almost Reedsville Road into urban area, and what means and methods you're going to propose to recognize you're moving into an urban settlement, and you're going to have higher traffic counts, turning movements, pedestrians, cyclists, and whatever else goes on in an urban neighborhood.
Gravel trucks.
Gravel trucks. So it's going to be a design challenge for them, but what the road will look like, I'm going to be premature for me to state, because there's so many different interrelated issues that they're going to have to assess.
And I have to agree with what Susan said, is that Reedsville Road has to be looked at, because a lot of those people are going to turn left and go down Reedsville Road to avoid the downtown traffic. But again, once again, I'll say thank you so much for coming and sharing. A lot of us took notes, a lot of us directed staff, and let's move forward. And can I have a motion, please, Councilor Williams?
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Woman, meeting report number 24-2023 received. And then all comments. Conservation parcel return to plan as in a future report, the council will lose position of this matter.
All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. And Councilor, next one, take the bylaw.
Myself, my company, on bylaw, report 20-23. Being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council on June 20th. 2023 be read at first, second, and third time and be finally passed, signed, and sealed by the mayor and clerk.
All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
You better go.
July 10th at 6 p.m. Council meeting. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you very much.